In this video, we're going to be covering matrix channels. So let's head on to the console and jump in. Here I'm going to select my first matrix, which is actually my sub outputs. My sub output is actually being fed directly from the left and right. Here we have our matrix sub overview. If we notice in the top left, we have our compressor, which is actually engaged, and we do see signal flowing through the channel. To the right, we have our direct in, as well as our mute status for the direct in. Below that, we have our safes for our automation recall. Below that, we have the bus trim for the channel, including the button for our talk, as well as linking. To the left of that, we have our insert tab. Right now, I do not have anything inserted on that channel, hence why the button is not engaged. Below that, we have our EQ button showing that the EQ is engaged. However, you're going to notice in the EQ graphical window below that, it's grayed out. The reason being is I actually have a graphic EQ inserted across that channel, so that's why we don't see anything. Also, you're going to notice that where our sends view would normally be, we have nothing indicating. That's because we can't use the sends on a matrix channel. And finally, on the bottom, we have our fader window. Again, there's no information here because we can't pan or assign the matrix channel to any of the left and right or mono buses. Here in the configuration window, we see where this output is actually patched to. This is showing us that this output is actually going out of my DL451 here at front of house on output 11. If we click on the destination button to the right, it brings up the patching window. And if I hover the mouse over, we'll see that we actually have signal present, so it's a great way to know if we have signal there when we're doing our patching. We could trace this back and we see that this is in fact being patched out of output number 11. Let's head on back. Below that, this is where we have our link options. So if we click on this, we'll see here that I already have many of the options engaged, such as the input channels, the direct input, the dynamics, insert, EQ, fader, and delay. Since I'm not actually linking this channel, I'm not too concerned right now for our options. So I'm going to go ahead and close out. To the left, we have the COL button, which actually stands for collapsed. This is actually for link channels. So let me go ahead and select my delay left and delay right outputs. With the collapse button engaged, we see right now that we have one fader but having stereo output metering. If I unselect this, you'll notice that the delay left and the delay right have split into mono outputs. All right, let's head back to our sub output. Next is the actual link button if we wanted to go ahead and link matrix 1 and matrix 2. Now we're in the link fader section. If I go ahead and engage these buttons, this is actually going to make the fader for these channels be the same level as my master faders. And if I was to raise the master fader up or down, these channels would also follow suit. So let's go ahead and do that. So now that I have the sub output engaged on the stereo fader, I'm going to go ahead and make the changes. And you notice as I'm moving the master fader, the sub level is following. Next, we have the bus trim for this channel, as well as a phase invert button. Here, we have the direct input. If you notice that the gain knob is set to infinity because I'm not bringing in anything on this channel. We also know that because it's telling us that it is unassigned. If we wanted to go ahead and assign this, we can click on the source button and it's going to bring us into the patching screen. Right now, I'm going to leave this unassigned. Now, let's head back to the top. We see that the mute button is engaged. The reason for this is because I don't have anything assigned to this channel, so it's automatically muted. Below that, we have the B button. Just so you know, this button has nothing to do with area B on the right side of the console. What this actually is for is if we were to solo this channel, if there was signal present, and if we engage the B button, we would be monitoring on the monitor B side of the console. So if we had our headphones plugged into the right side of the console, that's where we would hear it. If we had the B button disengaged and we had our headphones plugged in on the left side, we would hear signal coming out of the A monitor bus. And along with that, on the actual console surface, we would see signal either in monitor B if B was engaged, or on monitor A if B was unselected. The input zone button takes the delay compensation off of this that's going to the left and right and would allow separate delay compensation for its output. Finally, we have a pre-button that is located below the direct input. This would basically make the direct input pre-fader. Next is the safes for the automation. Here we can select EQ, automation, dynamics, mute, mic, and fader. In the insert window, We see that there's nothing assigned to this channel right now. But if we wanted to go ahead and assign anything, we can click on the destination or the source buttons to go ahead and do that. By clicking on that, it brings up the patching window, automatically setting us into the insert sends. As we see, the channel is selected, but I don't need anything inserted on this channel at this moment. Now that we're back, and if we had anything inserted for these channels, this is where we can go ahead and bring it in and out of the circuit. Next is the delay. Again, these delays are not in the typical type of delay that you would think where you hear repeats on a vocal. This is actually delaying the time that the signal is leaving the console. Since this is actually a sub feed, this is a great thing to have, especially if you do not have any system processing with you at front of house and if you need to add any channel delay on the subs to align to your main PA. Here we have the processing order button. If we go ahead and engage that, we'll notice that the EQ now is in front of the insert and the dynamics is after the insert. With the button disengaged, we see that the dynamics is before the insert and that the EQ is after the insert. And last, we have the send pan follows channel. If we have this engaged, and if we're using this on say a stereo matrix, any of our left and right panning is going to be attributed automatically to this matrix send. And finally, we have the set all contributions either pre or post. This is a great way to globally assign all the channels for this matrix to be either pre-fader or post-fader. Now we're in the compressor overview window, and as you see, we have the 5 time constants that you would normally expect to find on any type of compressor, such as threshold, ratio, attack, release, and makeup gain. Here, I have the MOR button engaged. This actually stands for more. The best way to explain more is that this makes the compressor a little bit more aggressive and more noticeable to the ear. Personally, I like this type of effect, so I'm going to go ahead and leave that engaged. Next, we have the mode button. This allows us to toggle through the 5 different types of compressors that we have on our console. The great thing about this is once we have our time constants set up, we can then toggle through and actually see and choose which compressor is the best for what we're looking for. Down on the bottom, we have a 3-way selectable knee. Below that, we have our filter section. Currently, I have the filter engaged, and I have the frequency set to 62 Hertz. Below that is the width control. Currently, I'm set to the wide width. If I engage it, you notice that it's narrowing up a bit. And last, we have like a peak type of filter, really dialing in on the frequency. Next is the menu button. If we engage this, this is going to bring up the patching window, so if we wanted to use this and key it in from any other channels, this is where we can do it. Let's head on back. Next is the listen. If we go ahead and engage the listen, it will allow us to actually be able to sweep through and hear precisely the frequencies that we're sweeping to activate the compressor. Next, we see that the compressor is set to internal, which means we don't have anything patched in to key this compressor. If we wanted to patch anything in, just like the menu button, we can click on the source button, and again, it brings us back into the patching window. Finally, we have our gain reduction meters, and we can see that we do have a little bit of compression happening at this time. Here in the EQ overview window, we see that we have a 6-band fully parametric EQ. However, on bands 1, 2, and 6, we have different shapes that we can go ahead and select. So let's start with band 1. Right now, it's set up for a fully parametric EQ. If we press the shape button, we have a shell filter, a 6 dB roll-off, as well as a 12 dB roll-off. For band 2, we have the fully parametric EQ, as well as a 24 dB per octave roll-off. And finally, for band 6, we have the fully parametric EQ, a shell filter, a 6 dB roll-off, and a 12 dB roll-off. To the right, we have the GEQ, which stands for graphic equalizer. Instead of using the 6-band fully parametric EQ, we can insert a graphic EQ across this output. That's personally what I like to do. So if we engage the GEQ button, the graphic EQ is now engaged. As I mentioned in an earlier video, if we press the GEQ button on our advanced mix navigation, you'll notice that the VCAs have now turned into the controls for the graphic EQ. We can simply bank to any frequency section that we need to access to have full control of the graphic equalizer. Here we have the sends overview. You're probably scratching your head wondering why this is blank. That's because for matrix channels, you can't assign this to any aux sends or any other matrix outputs. And now we have our fader overview page. Here we have the status of the mute and the solos. In between the mute and solo button, you'll notice the B button. Just so you know, this B button has nothing to do with the area B on the right side of the console. What it actually does, if we were to engage the solo, this would route the signal to monitor B on the right side of the console. So if we had our headphones plugged into the right side of the console, this is where we would actually be able to hear that audio. If the B button was disengaged and we had our headphones in the left side, that's where we would hear the audio from. Whether the B or the A button is assigned, we can look up to either monitor B or the monitor A portion to see the metering for the solo. Below that, we have a visual representation of the fader. On the control surface, we have the option of selecting any one of these 3 buttons. By engaging this button, you'll see that any of the 8 channels are now brought down, so we have full fader control of any of the channels. To the left of the fader, we see our VCA and our pop group assignments. If this channel was to actually be assigned to any VCAs or pop groups, we would see a green indication light.